Welcome to Source Not Found, a show about the worst versions of your favorite things. Every other week we explore an IP, franchise, or fandom by way of its sequels, spin-offs, and side projects. Basically anything but the source material. I'm Brandon June, and I'm the podcaster who says, neat!
And I am the once and future Bo Woodall.
Esquire. Manga Esquire.
Manga Esquire. The once and future Chuckabo Woodall.
Speaking of, so Final Fantasy, you might be expecting that. You should be expecting that. We should be providing that.
And honestly, there's a chance that you're like, this isn't Final Fantasy. I didn't even know anything about Final Fantasy before I started listening to this podcast. We're doing something other than Final Fantasy. I'm a little relieved. But
yeah,
we're coming back to this. Guys, we're sorry. This was supposed to be Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is what we were supposed to be covering today. That being said, this is maybe the most massive JRPG I've ever played.
It's huge. It's so much denser, even just sticking to the main path than I expected.
It's a big boy, and we expected to be able to, as one would guess, finish it by the time that we would be ready for the episode to drop. And we were very mistaken.
Full transparency, it's not a we. Bo is done. This is the tale of the teacher who didn't do his homework. I didn't finish. I'm still in chapter. Well, maybe I'm not done. I'm 65 hours into this motherfucker. just keeps going. But not to spoil it, but that's not a complaint. It's big. It's a big game. I'm not done.
Yeah,
I need some time.
I put over 100 hours into mine. So
I'll probably get there. Just the Queen's Blood, I could spend 100 hours on Queen's Blood, but
we're going to talk about that a lot.
Yes.
But that being said, we are moving on because it is almost my birthday, and last year we got to spend a whole month on Brandon shit.
You got a little itty bitty Beetlejuice.
I got
Patreon
a single
episode. Is that all you got?
Yeah, it was. Fucking, I'm like I'm the step kid with the new parent who's just like, oh, you're all right.
You're Harry Potter under the stairs. I'm fucking, what's the Dursley kid? With like my 35
Dudley.
presents or whatever. Dudley. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to actually talk about not only a much more broad topic and more accepted topic than Final Fantasy for a lot of people. I think this is a more accessible topic for a lot of people because it's not just a JRPG series.
Yeah, I think everyone to some degree has some familiarity or experience with some aspect of Arthurian legend.
And I'm relatively certain every person loves one thing involving King Arthur and the Arthurian legend.
I think that's
just my opinion.
A safe bet. Yeah, I think even if you don't recognize it, like if maybe not everybody, but I think of the vast majority of people likes either the source of it or how it's manifested in other fiction or media somewhere.
Kind of my thought as well. So we are going from a pretty niche topic that we cover to a pretty broad topic in that we are covering Arthur, the Arthurian legend.
Mm-hmm.
And its various and sundry appearances and iterations through media. But today, we thought we would do what we did with Final Fantasy and do a quick introduction. And because, unlike with Final Fantasy, this is something that I love very much, I'm going to take a little bit of the wheel on this one.
You definitely have more expertise in this area.
Yeah, this was my shit, dude. This was absolutely my shit.
Which actually makes me curious.
Okay.
Like, when I think about people I know in my life that have like the most interest and experience and knowledge about just general like legend and fantasy and like the mythos surrounding that and like the origin point for a lot of these swords and sorcery kind of tales and King Arthur, you're near the top of the list.
Oh,
so
thanks,
I'm
babe.
curious. Yeah, I'm curious. What was your first experience with this mythos? Like, what, as a child, got you so interested in this topic, in this legend?
A lot, actually. I believe it started with, and I could be wrong here because I'm relatively certain I saw like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Sam Neill's Merlin, First Night with Richard Gere, The Quest for Camelot, shit like that. I'm relatively certain I saw all of those before this book series, but this book series is where I fell in love. And it was T.A. Barron's The Lost Years of Merlin.
Okay.
It was a young adult series. Each book was about 250 pages. And it covered basically the teenage years of Merlin. He kind of like, there's like a shipwreck or something, and he lands on what you assume is Avalon. And he begins to learn magic and the laws of magic and how magic works. And as a kid, I already knew about Arthur because of the movies. I was completely aware of King Arthur and Merlin, Guinevere, Lancelot, Uther Pendragon, Galahad, Gawain. I knew the names, and I knew most of their, bailiwicks, if you would.
Yeah.
But it wasn't until that book series where I realized that I loved magic so much more than I love the idea of being able to swing a sword.
That actually kind of surprises me because I figured, I mean, you're the guy that was reading fucking Clive Cussler in like third grade or whatever.
Yeah.
Because that's a little bit later than I was expecting. I figured you were going to hit me with something like early elementary. Because Merlin is what?
Well,
that's like...
I was reading ahead. I got these books when I was 8 or 9.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So I read them like mid to late elementary school. I mean, they were like a 14 and up book supposedly, but I saw the picture at the library and I convinced my mom and dad to let me check it out. And then I finished the first one in like a couple of days to a week, and my mom's like, "Well, shit, he's reading big boy books now." And I fell in love. And from there, I started to do things like Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms. I started to find books involving wizards and warriors and how they worked, and dragons, and the whole fantastic mythos of everything that Arthur, Merlin, the Round Table, and the Arthurian legend kind of bring to the table.
Yeah.
Because this is just a quick aside and a quick beginning of some 101 shit. But Arthur has been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
The assumption is somewhere around 500 AD is when he could have lived as a real, like, as the focus that becomes fictional, right? But the first real example of him was from 828 in the Historia Britannium. And they assume that he was born 300 years before that, based on that writing. It was that and the Annales Cambria. Those were the two main sources initially. His first, we'll call it his first appearances. His pilot episodes, if you would.
Yeah, the series changes quite a bit from the pilot.
But what we are aware of, the Arthur that we know, the people that we can thank for that are twofold. Geoffrey of Monmouth, who did, oh my God, the Historia Regum Britanniae? I can't pronounce. The AE...
I'm so glad you're going first.
Yeah, the AE combination letter that has completely fallen off of the lexicon. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Like,
oh, yeah.
in encyclopedia. But the Historia Regum Britannium or whatever by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and then the much more accessible and much more well-known Le Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory.
That's what I was waiting for. I was like, how much French flourish is he going to throw on this thing?
Not enough. I took French in college, and I kept nothing. But Malory is where we get things like the Grail. So, what do we like? What this did to me as a kid, and the reason I fell in love with this so much, is you are introduced to archetypes that carry over into every piece of fiction. This is some Beowulf level foundational fictional characters, right? And guys, I'm sorry if I get a little pedantic. This, like I said, this is my shit. I am so passionate about Arthur and the legends. But it's the idea of a noble king brought down by ignoble causes and reasons. The idea of Merlin as the wise, learned mentor to a young, headstrong figure of power. The idea of the magical vizier. The idea of the idea of just a noble warrior king.
Yeah.
And then you get introduced to the ideas of chivalry and knighthood, things that Lancelot, Gawain, Galahad, Bedivere, etc. were supposed to kind of exhibit, though Galahad was, and I quote, the perfect knight. Our sweet baby boy.
You know, as you were talking, I was like, oh, wow, you're a much more precocious young reader than I was, because like the ignoble causes and all that, like I wanted to say that's not what drew me in, because I was a similar age. I cannot for the life of me remember. I can visualize the hardbound book that I got from the school library that I first read, like the King Arthur tales.
Yeah.
But I cannot remember the name or the author, like what version it was. But I can visualize it and remember the illustrations and all that. And it was a very memorable experience. I think before that, like probably The Sword and the Stone, the Disney film.
Yeah, sure.
Was my first experience with anything like that. But what stood out to me at the time was, you know, I'm a young reader. I'm a young boy. I'm vocalizing through Arthur. It's a power fantasy. You know, like I'm imagining that I'm, you know, pulling the sword from the stone, humble beginnings. And, you know, I'm born into this power I didn't know I had. You know, it's a very engaging tale to tell a young reader, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And I thought I liked it on that metric alone as a young kid, but maybe I'm selling my young self short. Like I think I can remember the first time that I got to the portion where Lancelot and Guinevere run off, like the betrayal, and it blew my little brain because I just wasn't accustomed to having a narrative like that took a turn, took like such a narrative turn. Like, wait, no, Arthur is our king, Guinevere is our queen. We're supposed to have a happily ever after. Like they're married. Like what? You know, at that age, I hadn't really had that twist happen to me before, and it really affected me.
I'm not kidding when I say this. Lancelot is intended to be a heroic character, despite his flaws and despite the dalliances with Guinevere. He is still intended to be a chivalrous protector of Guinevere, right?
Yeah.
I think this story hit me so young that there is a deep-seated part of me that fucking hates Lancelot so much. Like, I hate him so much, despite the fact that logically, literally, and literarily, I am aware of how he is intended to function as a character in a story. He is not a villain. In fact, he's probably the only reason that the Grail is found, that Guinevere lives.
Yeah.
And that Guinevere has a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
But fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Like,
as an adult, I recognize all those things, and I think he's one of the more interesting aspects to the mythos. I think he's a more interesting character to follow than many others. I don't know if I would say than Arthur, but almost equal, because I just, you on an emotional level, I feel the conflict within him, right? To be put in this position and to have his loyalties to his king, to his friend, and then also to just on a physical level, on an emotional level, on a romantic level, and to be combating that and trying to hold that at bay while still serving Guinevere and trying to like channel it into his role. Like, I will be her greatest protector and champion, and trying to hold that back. I find that very compelling. But as a kid, like, no, I'm a little boy reading Arthur. I'm Arthur. That's me. Lancelot has betrayed me. He stole my girl, and I felt that as a kid, and it was soul crushing.
See, that's really fascinating because for me, I never identified with Arthur.
Oh, really?
Ever. I don't know why.
Oh, wow.
I never identified with Arthur.
That's very surprising. Because I definitely did. From like The Sword and the Stone, like I'm watching this Disney movie, like, oh, that's me.
Yeah. Huh. I was, and we're going to get a little deeper than we normally do in regards to Beau's psyche here, but I was never like a person of action. Like, I didn't act quickly upon things. Like, I never got into fights, or like if I stopped a bully, it was because I talked them out of it or gave them my pudding pack instead of them taking it from somebody else. Like, I was never a quote unquote warrior, or ever could imagine myself being one.
Oh, same. I think that's why, like, given the opportunity, like, again, the power fantasy, right?
Well, see,
like,
even
while
then,
reading,
like,
I jump into that role, but
even now, I struggle reading books where the main character just swings a sword.
Huh.
Like, in D&D, I will play a rogue before I'll play a fighter every day of the week.
I mean, that's interesting. As an adult, yeah, I think I'm with you. As a kid, I was more likely to be able to sort of fully put myself into a protagonist that's nothing like me. As an adult, I find that more difficult. Or I, again, like you're saying, gravitate towards things that are more fitting my personality or my experience.
I think it may be, and this is a little off topic, so pardon, but I think it's because I didn't go for power fantasy. I went for a direct insert fantasy.
You have mentioned this before.
Like, as opposed to me being a character in a book, it would be the character in the book is me.
Yeah,
like,
and you're a big fan of like the isekai and literally getting pulled into other worlds.
Yeah. But like all of like fucking in Animorphs, my favorite character was not Jake or Marco. My favorite character was Tobias. The kid who very much fucks up in the very beginning and is a giant nerd and who likes the pretty girl. Like, yeah, all right, I don't want to be the leader. I don't want to be the wisecracking asshole. Like, that was instead I focused on like Merlin. Merlin has always been my character in the Arthurian legend, the one that I latched on to the hardest. And, I mentioned T.A. Barron, and that's where, the Lost Years of Merlin, where I fell in love with the character. It was only exacerbated by two books, well, one book series and one regular book, and I cannot remember, I believe the name of one of the authors is King, and not Stephen, obviously. Or it's J. King something, but the book is just called Mad Merlin, which is kind of messed up because Merlin's name is taken from, I believe, the Celtic meridian, which is just means madman. So like
mad
Merlin. Mad man. But the other series, and I recommend this wholeheartedly if you're down for some really, really dense like not quite Game of Thrones level political high fantasy machinations, but it's Stephen Lawhead. he did an entire Arthurian legend book series that starts with Merlin's dad Taliesin, who was a bard, and then into Merlin, Pendragon, Arthur, Grail, and Avalon, I believe is the whole series. I still own all those bad boys, and I'll still read them every couple of years, and they still hit hard.
I might have to check that out, because Merlin is a character, like, you know, I'm familiar with him, but only by way of, he's always part of the Arthur tale. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I've never really, I don't think, other than the Sam Neill Merlin TV show, which it's been so long, spoiler alert, we're
covering that shit
soon.
real good.
So I don't remember if it mostly focuses on Merlin. I mean, is his show, but like, is it? I guess I'll find out when we get there. I don't know if it's still mostly about the other characters.
And that's a noticeable difference between you and I in this case. For me, Arthur is a part of Merlin's story, not Merlin being a part of Arthur's story.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just mean the way it's usually framed or presented to us. Like,
agreed.
We're usually getting the Arthur tale, and Merlin is like, his role is setting up Arthur's birth and then background, you know, pulling him away from his father and then bringing him back later on. So would you say, I was curious, like, you've had so many experiences with the mythos. Do you have a clear favorite?
A clear favorite?
That's probably a tough question, because you've mentioned a lot of things that were like formative for you. But maybe a favorite presentation of the tale.
We talked about actually covering this. Peter David's book series, starting with Nightlife.
Okay.
It's basically Arthur being finally, Merlin's been waiting for, 1,200 years. And he's basically like a beggar in New York City, and Arthur is finally reborn with, he has no knowledge of his past life, but it's slowly coming back to him, kind of through like interactions with certain people. But like, Arthur's been reborn, Guinevere's been reborn, Lancelot, like the timeline is going to repeat itself. And you get to read this book knowing that these are modern characters that are going to go through the same shit that we are all familiar with. Like the betrayal of Lancelot and the running away of Guinevere. And, that whole thing. And it's very cleverly done, and it's very, very wonderful to watch. But
yeah, I would like to check that out. That sounds good.
I don't know if I have another standout favorite. I mean, I mentioned Lawhead, I mentioned T.A. Barron. They're both absolutely wonderful. But for me, it's the fact that I can see bits and pieces of the Arthurian legend and what it has brought to storytelling in damn near everything I watch or read, even sometimes,
Yeah. You are the more literary guy, I'm realizing, because like my answer is, I like that movie. I like that movie Excalibur by John Borman.
I mean, it's very good. Yeah.
I just rewatched it last night to just get in the mood and the mindset for our conversation today. And it's like, it's still not a great movie. Like, it's like there's some bad acting, there's some overacting. Patrick Stewart is unhinged. It's awesome. And it's very abrupt, like cutaways. It's weird. Like, oh yeah, if you don't know the story, this is very hard to follow. Like it just like jumps around very abruptly to like the next scene in the tale, without like a lot of interstitial, I think, kind of necessary narrative. But man, it's just so wonderful to watch and like just visually arresting. I love it.
I need to revisit it. I don't think I've seen it in probably like 10 years.
It had been a while for me.
It's been a bit.
I had a good time.
One of our favorite movie series or protagonist, Army of Darkness, pulls the Arthur and Merlin are both fucking there. Like, it's I don't know, man. I'm gonna say my most enjoyed version I've experienced would probably be the Peter David series. But the one that affected me the most is probably Lawhead. Because it goes real deep into like Merlin being the child of a bard, and like it almost feels like the first version of Name of the Wind. Like, have you read Name of the Wind?
No, I don't know it.
Oh, okay.
I'm over here watching movies.
But it's shit. I don't even know how to go now. Like that fucking made me downshift so hard.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of like modern adaptations. The one thing that was surprising me, because I had not read Lemort d'Arthur.
It's rough. I have.
Well, see, that's the thing.
A rough go.
I read it, so I picked it up and read it to get ready for Arthur season. And it is archaic.
Yeah.
But it was also so much more modern than I expected for a tale that's like, what are we talking about, like 1400s, 1500s? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, I think it's 1500s.
Because like it moves. It's, it's short chapters, and it's just like it's a tome.
Yeah.
It's long, and it, you go through all these adventures with the various knights or whatever. But there's this one I excerpted something, because if I really thought on it, maybe I can think of an earlier example, but it's like, is this one of the first one-liners? So it's when they're fighting the Romans. Then the battles approached, and shoved and shouted on both sides, and great strokes were smitten on both sides. Many men overthrown, hurt, and slain, and great valiances, prowesses, and appertices of war were that day showed, which were overlong to recount the noble feats of every man, for they should contain a whole volume. But in especial, King Arthur rode in the battle, exhorting his knights to do well, and himself did as nobly with his hands as was possible a man to do. He drew out Excalibur, his sword, and awaited ever whereas the Romans were thickest and most grieved his people. And anon he addressed him on that part, and hew and slew down right, and rescued his people. And he slew a great giant named Galapus, which was a man of a huge quantity and height. He shorted him, and smote off both his legs by the knees, saying, Now art thou better of a size to deal with than thou were. And after he smote off his head, I was like, he's got a fucking quip. He's got a fucking quip.
He literally just said, I cut you down to size. Like, holy shit.
Like, that was awesome. I was like in the midst of this kind of like archaic verbiage and language there and sentence structure, like to have that moment. And there are like a lot of moments like that are very fun and modern and gory. And it's a pretty good read. Like as far as, I don't know, when you feel like you're doing your literature homework, which as English majors, we both know well. I don't know. It's a pretty good time.
So I just from that, two little fun, not even trivia bits, but things to go off of it. Historically, I think it said that he killed over 900 people in single combat in a single battle.
Damn.
Like, oh boy, did not fuck about. And this is a nice little bridge between Final Fantasy and King Arthur. Do you know what Excalibur means?
Right. No.
This is fucking wild. I did not know either. I laughed my ass off. It is from the Welsh. Caelidwich, I believe. Pronunciation is probably absolute dog shit, but it just means hard edge, which is one of Cloud Strife's fucking swords.
That's awesome. I wonder if that's a deliberate.
It has to be
reference, right? It would have to be, right? Yeah,
it has to be.
And Final Fantasy is not shy about like just making a literal, like very on its face, like obvious reference. Like we have Biggs and Wedge, things like that. Like, yeah, we love Star Wars. We love Arthurian legend. Here it is.
But yeah, I saw that and was like, oh, cool.
If we're getting into backgrounds, there's a fun one I have about the Grail.
Okay, hit me.
From The Spoils of Anun, which is a tale from, I think, around 900. So it was actually in L'Amour d'Arthur. They were talking about the backgrounds for some of these and like what was pulled out of like Viking lore, which within that lore, there was a cauldron containing the meat of poetry. I'm not going to try and pronounce. I have no idea how to say this word. Olderir? I don't know Norse. Sorry, or Celtic. I don't know what we're doing with it. Wait, no, yeah, I don't know Norse.
Norse.
Well, the
Celtic.
next sentence is in Celtic tradition.
Welsh. I don't know.
Languages. In Celtic tradition, cauldrons are typically symbols of plenty, much like a cornucopia, providing abundant food for the worthy, conferring heroic status, and in some instances, even returning the dead to life. This is likely the earliest version of the eventual Grail quest. I like that we had this initial sort of like Viking lore about cauldrons providing plenty, and then as things get Christianized and changed later down the road, it becomes the Grail tied to like the Christian mythos. And then there's a cool scene it pulls out where when they have the Grail appears to the court at Camelot during a feast on Pentecost, and it basically provides everyone with like meat and drink. So like we have this little aspect of the cornucopia cauldron still extant in the Grail,
right?
All these years later, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. That I did not know about the whole like cup of plenty idea.
I think that's part of what is so fascinating about the Arthurian legend as well. Like it's, I mean, you gave us the numbers, right? Like, wow, we have this just legend that spans such a length of time and has changed so much within that time. And even like little aspects like, I don't know, is Mordred Arthur's son from incest or is it his nephew, right? Like little things like that, details change in the telling.
Is the Lady of the Lake Nimue? Are they two separate people? Which one was Merlin's student? Which one locked him in the Crystal Cavern? It kind of goes a little bit of...
yeah, exactly.
Was Merlin a vizier? Was he the person who planned Arthur's birth? Or was he basically just becoming Arthur's advisor because Arthur was supposed to be the once and future? Like, there's so much that has changed, and there are so many different versions of the tale, and all of them. This is what blows my mind for the entire thing, and maybe one of the reasons that the Arthurian legend is so important to me. All of them create a good story. Yeah. Like, there are none of these versions that are like, no. Mordred is not his child from incest. It's his fucking nephew from King Boar or whatever. Because the incest thing is a bad story. And then you're like, no, it's a good story if you look at it because it's the sorceress Morgana's fault. Morgan Le Fay is also from this whole thing. Like, if she's the person who did this, like, you have a villain, another villain who creates the villain that will eventually bring down Arthur because Arthur succumbed to base desires at one point in time. Like, yeah, and it's also just like a neat tied up narrative and sort of like resonates because it's this sort of echo of how he was begotten, right? Where his father, through the magic of Merlin, like appeared to, oh shoot, what's the name? Hang on. Fuck, I don't have all of my Uther Pendragon notes together. I didn't know we were going to go into Uther. He takes on the personage of... He takes on the Duke, guise right? of the woman's husband and then basically makes an Arthur baby with her. Yeah, and she thinks she's just sleeping with her husband. Igraine. Her name was Igraine. Yeah. So like to have that and then to have like Arthur between, this, like his tale, and then it just sort of ends with like a similar sort of like, yeah, it's like a weird sins of the father carrying over to the sins of this, like, it's, right? Again, there is not a version of this story that they get rid of a part and replace it with something else to make it a better story. Like, however the story is created, it ends up being compelling. And I think a lot of that is due to the archetypical nature of a lot of these characters and how important those archetypes have been in not just storytelling, but also in the hearts and minds of consumers.
You know, that's a good point. I'm thinking, like, I was thinking earlier as we were talking about like the changes or whatever, and same thing with the Bible, right? We have these sort of conflicting accounts of like the life of Jesus and what miracles he performed and how events transpired. And it's harder to talk about that one because people can sort of take that personally, like, you know, because they have an investment in having either, even if it's not a literal reading of that, like there's, again, the divine nature of this tale. So we're not as open to just exploring it as a narrative work that changes with the influences of the culture around it over time. But similarly, like a tale of such power that's been passed down for so long becomes sort of a catch-all for archetypes, you know, with like the Bible, not even just around Jesus, but just like, oh, you know, like if you go to like the Epic of Gilgamesh, or just like different, fundamental archetypal sort of myths and legends and origin stories that get kind of pulled into this work that's extant today and sort of collects them all and transmutes them. Similar like to Arthur as well, like just looking at the Grail, right? Like, oh, we have all these different mythologies from like the surrounding areas and cultures and peoples that are getting pulled in and changed and made into part of the Arthur mythos, which is really fascinating.
Yeah. I think for me, the most like, this kind of goes back to my history with Arthur and like the fact that I much like you, I studied mythology and religion in college, more mythology than religion, if that makes sense. But the fact that Celtic mythology does not play a very big role in the Arthurian legend, despite the fact that all of the characters are derived directly from Celtic language, is kind of telling to me as well. Like these Englishmen are creating chivalrous characters based around, in the case of the Hunt for the Grail, a Christian artifact. You don't have any of them looking for the wreath of Dagda, you know? Like, none of them are worshiping the goddess of war more again. It is all, we are knights of the one true Lord, our God. And despite the fact that they pull from all of these differing cultures and belief systems and archetypes, it all ended up distilling down into kind of one way forward, which was, hey guys, Christianity is the new big thing. Let's go ahead and make a character. We can make some toys, some TV shows, comic books, toss him out there. And I just, it blows my mind that this is a character that, for me, outlives and outlasts what he was expected to be. Right? Like, I'm sure Sir Thomas Malory wasn't like, fuck yes, we're doing the Grail quest. We've got Galahad. We've got all these characters. I don't think he was like, okay, 600 years later, they are still going to be making movies about these fuckers. Like, there's just no way. And instead, we have these lasting archetypes and characters that are beloved by a lot of people.
Yeah.
This is, you brought up the Bible, so I kind of want to say this. Monty Python covered Jesus and King Arthur for a fucking reason.
Yeah.
Like,
it's a good point. So you just mentioned the great cast of characters. I'm curious, do you have a favorite knight? I know it's not Lancelot.
It is not Lancelot.
Yeah.
It used to be Galahad until I realized he was a giant prude.
Okay.
It was Galahad through high school, and then I did a little bit more research, like, because he was the only person that could sit in the Siege Imperius. Like, he was the ideal of chivalry and what is good in knighthood. So like he was aspirational, right?
Yeah.
Man, I really like Gawain.
Yeah.
Like just kind of just a traveling badass who likes to fight because he's good at fighting. And then so Gawain number 1, because if you haven't read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, you should. It is incredible. Especially if you can get the one that has modern English next to old English and you get to read them side by side. It's really fucking cool. I really like Bedivere because he was also, if I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've read anything about Bedivere because people don't really talk about him much. He was a knight scholar, and he also worked alongside Merlin, and it was said that he could do some magic.
Okay.
So I like the idea of a knight just kind of being also a very learned man with a little bit of magic power, but being a spell sword, if you will.
Yeah, he's my Cloud Strife. You know, it's like, yeah, I need you up there dealing out the damage, but I got a couple spell materials in there because, like, you're gonna be just racking up the ATB gauges. Shit.
Yeah,
wrong
we're
topic.
Not there yet, bud.
Sorry, I'm about back.
Dude, I've dreamt about ATB gauges.
I gotta say, recency bias, but Excalibur made Percival really compelling. I think the section of him in that movie, after 10 years of looking for the Grail, and the scene where he stumbles upon Mordred for the first time, and this tree of all the hanged knights that have been caught by Mordred in their quest. It is a horrifying, just kind of surreal, amazing 10 minutes of movie. I love it.
So that's another really good point. Like Parzival or Percival, however you want to, whichever version you want to look at, eventually they made it where he found the Grail. But in fact, like, Galahad was always supposed to be the one who was able to bring the Grail back. Because he was, again, perfect knight.
Yeah, I kind of like Balin. He's not a knight of the Round Table because it's before they have the Round Table. This is like early in the tale. But his is just a tragic story where, you know, he's like, he swaps out his shield and he's riding into a new area. And so they can't identify him. They think he's like an enemy combatant. And his brother rides out in full armor to challenge him. And they fight each other to the death, and they're bleeding out. And then they pull off their helms and to find out, like, we're one another's brother. We've just killed one another. And it's a really tragic story. But there's a moment, before they realize who the other one is, and they're just going at it for hours. And they're about to relent. And then in Le Morte d'Arthur, it mentions how they look up and they see that the windows were full of damsels. And so they joined into the fray once more. I just love the idea. Like, I'm out here killing my brother, and there's part of me that like wants to relent. Like, we could avoid this whole thing, but I go up and I see there's these lovely ladies watching us, and I gotta show off a little bit. Yeah. To my own demise. But he's interesting because, like, again, he comes and goes so early and so quickly in the narrative, but there's a version of the tale where Merlin tells Arthur that had he lived, Balin would have been the best and bravest knight.
Yeah.
Take that, Galahad. Take that.
Well, so funnily enough, Galahad was never intended to be either the best or the bravest. Like, that is one thing that Monty Python did a lot of things right with that movie. But Galahad was supposed to be the purest version of what a knight was supposed to be. So, like, at least I believe this is correct. Lancelot was very much like the bravest, most headstrong of the knights. And Gawain was supposed to be, I think, the best with a sword. And, you know, so on and so forth. They all had their own little thing. But Galahad was supposed to be the best knight. It like with no
Gotcha.
qualifiers.
Right.
I believe. But you know, I thought about it, and I really think my favorite knight is maybe Sir Robin. The not quite so brave of Sir Lancelot, Sir Robin.
Yeah, and I know the one.
Fuck, dude,
Another one.
all I can think about is Eric Idle in that fucking red wig.
That's a good choice. I like the Dark Knight.
Fuck off. I don't know, man. I love these archetypes. I love this, all of the variations of stories. I love the fact that everything we said, you can find it in a different version of Arthur, of it being both correct and incorrect. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and even then, the story still compels you to read more or watch more.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I mean, fuck. I based the entirety of my shitty YA novel I wrote around the Arthurian legend.
It's a great foundation for all kinds of stuff, right?
It was a great foundation, a shit book though. I thought about making us do it, but I don't know if my psyche is in a place where we give it the Advent Children treatment.
It puts me in an awkward position because I'm notoriously cranky about the things we cover. It's like, uh-oh. The author is here on the show with me.
It'd be like covering Mortal Kombat again, but Jeff Roven is here.
Yeah, exactly. We bring on Jeff Roven. Like, oh, no, I love the inflatable Sub-Zero shoes. That's a great choice. I love that. We would spend an hour and a half just saying how much we love the Scorpion story and then touching nothing else. I want to make a bone thrown joke, but then I'm just like looking over my shoulder like, how is Roven responding to this?
Yeah, does he like it? Roven, do you like me?
Are you feeling this? I'm excited though. I mean, we got some good shit on the way. Should we list out all the things we're covering?
Yeah. I think it'll be helpful for the listeners to be prepped.
Read along, watch along, play along with us.
We are doing Sam Neill's Merlin.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
I'm very excited to watch that again. I
don't know what order we're doing these in.
Apparently, even when we say the order, we
fuck it up.
Might change it. Who knows? It might take me 65 hours to get through Merlin, and I just might not be done.
It is long, but it's not that long. So Sam Neill's Merlin, we're doing Mage.
Actually, I needed to ask you about this. Should I just read the first volume of Mage? I've not read Mage before.
It depends on if the first. Yeah, the first trade.
Okay.
The first trade is the best starting point, and it's honestly, I think, the best version of the book. But for the listener, Mage is by Matt Wagner, or Wagner if you're nasty.
That surprised me. I was just waiting here, like, oh wow, like the composer Wagner, huh? I was Matt Wagner. I watch movies about Arthur. I don't read books.
I've only seen one interview with him, and they introduced him as Matt Wagner, but I'm pretty sure he pronounces his name Matt Wagner, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Maybe we had like a very pretentious interviewer.
Could have been.
Yeah, or maybe they're just nervous and like, I don't know what to do with this.
I was.
Lemort Arthur.
Lamorte.
Arthur.
And then we're doing, is it Order 1886?
Oh yeah, I'm very excited about this.
I'm stoked. I am very stoked. Yeah. Basically, 1886 London, the Round Table is reborn, and let's get to shooting shit with steampunk stuff.
Yeah, I've always wanted to play this. I missed it when it came out. It's been on my backlog for a long time. I think I can safely say, in fact, it's the one criticism I hear about the game is that it's quite short, so shouldn't take me 65 hours.
Fingers crossed, man.
Should not.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed.
I'm very excited. I love I love these characters, these stories. I can't fathom how anyone who enjoys a good story cannot find something in the Arthurian legend to embrace.
But if you are one of those people, we would love to hear from you.
Yes, please email me /us. More attack me. Come at me. Get me in the comments. Our email, sourcenotfoundpod. Jesus, Bo. sourcenotfoundpod@gmail.com. We are on.
It's okay. The email address has changed a few times in the retelling over the millennia.
Yeah.
You know,
It
sometimes
started
it's using
out
more of like the Norse influence. Yeah.
It started out as Source Not Found Podcast, and then it was SNF Pod, and then it was it is sourcenotfoundpod@gmail.com. We are now on Blue Sky at Source Not Found Pod. And you know, the other socials, we're around Instagram, Facebook. We love it. Check out our YouTube, where you can find the backlog of games that Brandon played. I sincerely doubt he's going to post all 100 some odd hours he's going to put into Final Fantasy VII up there, because God knows I don't know if YouTube can handle that.
The servers are full. I mean, actually, that is part of why I'm behind, is because I'm still continuing to stream, and I decided not to stream this game, which I'm glad of, because Final Fantasy is a very important game for me, 7 in particular, and I needed to keep this one as like a personal sort of adventure, just to enjoy off stream and just hang out with my best buds in the party from childhood, and it was the right choice. But for other games that I do play on stream, twitch.tv/LeJunebug, link down in the show notes, right next to the link to Jesse Jelena, the architect of our amazing theme song. Check him out on YouTube. Lots of good work. Lots of great stuff.
Always slaps, and hits so right. I don't know, man. Normally I have something to say about toilets and stuff, but I am genuinely so excited to talk more about some of my favorite fucking characters that ever, except for fucking Lance. Check your toilet for Lancelot, because he'll steal your girl.
Stay French. Stay studying that French. Le Morty to Arthur. I had nothing. I don't know.
I thought you said ranch.
Check your Grail for a better sign off. It's probably in there somewhere. It's a cornucopia it provides, if you just know where to look.
I thought you said
Percival got it for you.
Stay ranch as like the dressing.
Sure. That's what I like in my Grail. It's just an endless bounty of ranch.
A cauldron of ranch dressing. Serve me plenty of buffalo wings and chicken tendies.
I'm imagining all the knights just like congregated around, and Arthur just like is pouring out this endless like
I was just thinking, you know how
pour of ranch across the feast. Yeah.
No, you just like when you go to a Ren fair, they have the big turkey legs, and it's just fucking Arthur dipping a turkey leg in a giant fucking cauldron of ranch dressing, biting it, and the ranch just like drips down his beard. He picks up a stein of mead, pounds it, and then dips it back. Double dips, obviously.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Christ alive. And his Grail.